discover what they want in their life. What is your aspiration? What will really make a difference 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Who do you want to be? And know that there is a path for you to get there, that you don't need to be living inside the same box. You can be a different person. You can be living a different life, but you need to find out what that is for you, that blueprint, that desire, and then be willing to put in the effort and to make the sacrifices, and you will get there.
Giovanni, it's such a pleasure to have you. And I want to thank our mutual friend, Sue Sala, for introducing us. And it was so nice. You sent me a copy of your book and I read it and I was very impressed. I think it's your third one on overcoming self-doubt and really getting true confidence, which I'm very, very passionate about. So really looking forward to talking about everything about self-improvement.
Wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here, Lawrence.
So Giovanni, can you talk a little bit? I'm so curious how you ended up in Australia from Brazil.
So I married a foreigner, so Brazil was not her, main culture, and it was a bit of a culture shock for her. Life didn't work out there for her, and I promised that, like, hey, you come to Brazil and let's try life here for 2 or 3 years, and if it doesn't work out, then we move to another country, and that's what happened. And we're thinking of English-speaking countries that are developed and friendly to immigrants and good weather, and Australia on top of the list for us.
That's one of the few places I love to travel. And I remember I was in Australia about 15 years ago, and I was there for nearly a month, traveling all around. And it was one of those places where I could see myself moving there. And actually, one of my uncles, he did not get on very well with my grandfather. And he said to him, as soon as I'm old enough, I'm emigrating as far as I can away from England. And he did. He graduated college and then he left to Australia, and he's still there. So it seems like a good place on balance, being English speaking and safe, and there seems to be some opportunity there. So it seems like a great place to live.
Yes.
Where in Brazil are you from originally?
I'm from Porto Alegre. It's a city in the south. It's not one of the main ones, but
is it one of the safer cities?
I haven't been to any safer cities in Brazil. They're all kind of like...
Okay. I'll tell you a story. Yeah. One of my old Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructors, he moved to the US, and he just told me one day, he told me why. He said, I worked really hard in Brazil. I saved up. I bought a motorcycle. He said the first few days, I was so excited. I was at a stoplight, and some guy just pulled a gun out, put it to my head, and said, give me your bike. And so he said he got off, he gave it to the guy, and he said he vowed, I'm going to leave this country and go somewhere with safer, more rules and less crime. So that's how he ended up in the US. Although the US, the crime here is not so good right now as well. So, but Giovanni, I know you talk about being very focused on self-improvement for at least the last 10 years. I think that was your profession. What were you doing before? Because I know you're an author and a coach and a mentor. What were you doing before you were doing that?
So since I was 14 years old, I'm interested in philosophy, spirituality, meditation. I started really early, but for the big part of my life, this was just my passion. It was not my work. Now, I went to law school. I did 5 years of bachelor degree. I worked with law for 5 years. Then I migrated to Australia. I taught myself programming, work as an app developer for like 5 years until I got the citizenship. And then I said, like, okay, I did 10 years of the 9 to 5. Now I want to do something that I'm really passionate about. And I started getting into, the whole online business world. And I felt like, you know what, I have something to offer. There is a growing interest in meditation, and let me make this happen. So that was 10 years ago, 2014.
Congratulations. That's it's so beautiful when you can match your, the way you make your money with your true passion. And like you said, you gave it 10 years, which is a long time. Too many people, they either try to jump in before they put the time in to really develop something, and then it's going to fail, or they start doing the thing they hate to make money, and then they think, yeah, eventually I'll change, and you get what's called the golden handcuffs, where you get tied to a paycheck and you have the responsibility of maybe a mortgage and a lifestyle, and it's so hard to leave that. So I give you a lot of credit, because I actually did the same thing. I was trading, and I had this dream to pursue professional martial arts and competing, and some of my best friends said, Lawrence, your life is too good. You'll never give this up. I don't care how big the dream is. And I remember thinking they don't know me, and it was tough. It was tough. You're giving up a good, safe income to follow your dreams. But at the end of the day, you and I will never have regrets when we get older by taking those kind of risks.
Right. It takes guts, it is a risk. You need courage. But what really helps is being in touch with yourself and knowing what matters to you, being aware of who you are and what you care about, knowing what I call your aspirations. If you know that this is an aspiration, you know that you will not be able to ignore it. I mean, some people do, but the price is big.
Yes. I'd love to talk. You do write about when you were young. I don't know if you struggle with self-confidence or I think any young person, they haven't really formed their character yet. And, you're a parent of young kids and I have a young son. And I'm often thinking the same thing. Like, I want him to really figure out his purpose in life, but it's going to take some time. So can you talk a little bit about your journey of really, like you said, when you were 14, that's so young, but you already had this real deep passion and interest and this idea of self-improvement. That's very unusual. And I imagine that must have been hard for you to fit in with your peers because the other 14-year-olds probably weren't on the same level as you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was the weirdo at that time. Meditating was not cool. Being vegetarian was not cool. Talking about these things was not cool. It was the time hadn't come for it as a society yet, but I had that passion, I had that interest, that fascination. Now, many people, for example, people that come to me for coaching, they want to find that, but it doesn't come naturally. And there are many reasons for that. And when that is the case, you can go through certain exercises to try to get in touch and see what's important for you. But in this journey, it's distractions are the biggest enemy. Because distractions in the form of instant gratification through social media, news, games, pleasures, whatever it is, they give you an immediate feel-good emotion, sensation for almost no cost. And so for your brain, it's hard to justify, withdrawing your attention away from these things, going inside and figuring out what is something that is going to give you a deeper sense of fulfillment, a deeper happiness, more long-lasting happiness, but that will require a lot of effort and sacrifice, right? So the easiest thing is to just get distracted and to go and flow with what's happening in your life. It takes, sometimes it takes a moment where life pulls the rug underneath our feet that we go and realize like, oh, I'm not happy if I continue like this for the next 5-10 years. I'm not going to be happy. And then you stop and you start realizing that you have to connect with your aspirations. You have to realize who you are and what is your sense of purpose.
I couldn't have said it any better. And I always think about how lucky I am. I'm in my mid-40s and I didn't have my first cell phone till early 20s. And that was a very basic cell phone. And I think it would have been so difficult to have the same kind of, I have very fond memories of my youth, to have that same kind of youth if I had the distractions of a smartphone in my pocket. I think about it all the time. I really think that's one of the challenges is we have so much, knowledge and games and instant gratification at the touch of our fingertips. But I know it's the same with you and the same with me. And most people, if you look at your most, things you're most proud of in your life, it was never an easy, quick fix. It was always something that was one of the hardest things to do. So I'm so glad you said that. And the other thing you said about you have to find what your kind of passions are and what really lights your fire. And that's exactly what happened to me when I was training. I spent all weekend just training at the gym 2-3 times a day. And I was like, well, this is what I do on my days off. That's my passion. But for other people who, I'm sure you get people because you're a coach where they come to you and they say, I've got my thing that I'm doing, my 9 to 5, whatever it is, I can pay the bills. I don't really have any other passions. What's some advice for them? Like, because what I always say is, if you're a runner, go find a running group. If you want to learn martial arts, go find a jiu-jitsu gym and try to find communities of people and things that you might learn that will become a passion. But it's very hard if they're just unhappy, but they don't know what makes them happy. That's got to be a very tough person to help, I'd imagine.
It is because, when you are ambitious, when you have, when you're kind of very interested in a couple of things, then you can explore what would it mean to embrace that as kind of your main life task or activity. But when you are just jumping from branch to branch, as it's the nature of browsing the web often. So if that is imprinted in your brain because you're doing that all the time, you may have this skepticism, this cynicism, this, everything is just kind of flippant and nothing is really important. And you just go a click away when the thing that you're watching no longer grabs your attention. And so in this frame of mind, it's difficult to get in touch with something deeper, right? It's a little bit like if you're used to eating fast food, you're not going to enjoy the taste of real food. And fast food is cheap, and it's fast, and it's tasty, but it doesn't have the nutrients you really need. Mm-hmm. And likewise, these pleasures, entertainment, and distractions, they are quick, they are easy, they feel good in the moment, but they don't have the ingredients that we need to make us happy, to make us feel fulfilled. So if a person is really struggling to find a deeper sense of purpose and goal in their life, I would say, try to go on a dopamine detox of sorts and block yourself out for all of these things that give you a premature sense of satisfaction, so that you can allow yourself to be bored, so that you can allow yourself to have nothing to do. And that will force you to turn within, to think, to reflect, and then you will discover something.
Such good advice. You brought back a childhood memory, Giovanni, of when I was just, I think, between high school and college, and it was the summer in England. And I really wanted to read the book, Tolstoy's book, War and Peace, which is a huge, huge book. And I read it that summer. And I remember just in between reading, just sitting in my parents' backyard and just being bored and just thinking about, like, what do I want to do? What are some of the passions? And I always think, if that had been me now with technology, I wouldn't have ever been bored, and I never would have figured this stuff out. And you're right. It's such a challenge. I know Joseph Campbell, he's got that wonderful quote, and it says, "Follow your bliss." And it's such great advice. And I think one of his words of advice for people that don't know, kind of where they want to go in their life, they haven't figured out the direction or what's going to really be their bliss, is just to read widely. And he talked about, I think when he graduated, I think it was right after the Depression in America, and there was no jobs, nothing available. And he spent years just reading. And then he became kind of an author and a philosopher. But I think that's such good advice, but it's so hard to do. It's so hard to actually take a break from technology and read old school books where you spend hours like getting deep into a subject and letting your thoughts go there. It's such a skill that I think we all need to relearn, because one of the things that I used to prize is my focus. And I noticed, because I use my cell phone a lot for work and real estate, I've lost a lot of that focus because I'm also getting those dopamine hits.
Yeah. And then what happens is we're getting ourselves used to experiencing a spike of excitement, of new information, of, the videos on YouTube, they are built this way, because if they're built this way, they get longer views and more subscribers, and YouTube like it. So it pushes them up in the algorithm. So more and more, everything that we're going to consume is going to become more like this, kind of punchy and short. And then what happens is, if there's not another spike of intense stimulation for 10 seconds, we're out, seeking that through another video, through another article, through another post. And books are not like this. You may, deep books, deep thinking is not like this. You may spend several minutes without anything exciting apparently happening, and you're just kind of brewing, you're just digesting that information. But what's possible when you create space for this type of deeper thinking can never happen through that shallow thinking.
Can you talk a little bit about when you say I recommend kind of a dopamine detox? Can you talk about some of the things that entails?
In my teenage years, I wanted to become a Buddhist monk for a phase of my life. And a phase, I don't mean like 2 months. It was more like 3 or 4 years. And, at that time I was going on retreats with the monks, etc. And in the retreat, like, there's no other stimulation. It's just you and yourself. And you start becoming more aware of what matters to you. You start becoming more aware of what's inside of you. You become more comfortable sitting with your own thoughts and emotions. And you don't need to run away when something is unpleasant, when you're experiencing an emotion that you don't like. So a dopamine detox nowadays, if people are into meditation, they can go in a meditation retreat, and that's an excellent dopamine detox. But if not, you can do dopamine detox in your own home. As you're actually doing work, you don't even need to take a vacation. And I call this, in my book, the monk week. So basically, for 1 week, you cut out all sources of distractions and instant gratification. No social media, no news, no games, no forums, or the and you just go and do the important things. You exercise, you eat well, you sleep well, you make time for self-reflection, for meditation, and for doing deep work, whether in your passion project or in your career. And you will, when you go through this process in the beginning, you will experience a lot of boredom. And you will feel that I hate this and I can't continue this. I understand the benefits, but I don't think I can do it. These thoughts might pop up. But if you just stick with it for a little longer, surprisingly, that boredom disappears and you start finding work itself interesting. You start kind of reprogramming your brain so that you can enjoy real food rather than fast food. So that is the general protocol, cutting out all sources of distraction and instant gratification. Because if you leave even one, all your energy of dopamine can still go through that one source. It's a little bit like if you build a dam and there's one little hole, no matter how small, eventually that hole is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger, and the dam is going to be destroyed. So in the monk week, you want to be really strict with yourself. It's as if you are living in the jungle with a computer but no internet, or internet but with like really strict rules, so that you experience what it's like to live in, to have more space, to think, to be with yourself, and to do deep work.
So my mutual friend, my friend that I want to introduce you to, who's South African, but he moved to Australia, Rocco, he actually gave me that advice about a year ago. He said, well, we talk a lot, and he said, Lawrence, I think you need more space in your life. And it was such good advice. I didn't really appreciate it at the time. It took a few months, and I thought, he is so right. I do need more space. And what you said about the fast food analogy is such a good one, because I know that when my diet's been bad, I'm craving a lot more sugar and I don't appreciate good food. But when I'm eating clean and very healthy with good ingredients, I really enjoy it. I really enjoy eating good. Obviously, I enjoy the feeling afterwards. My body feels good. I don't feel bloated or sick, but I actually enjoy the food because my taste buds aren't blunted by all this sugar and all these chemicals and this crap. And it's such a good analogy for your brain too. We have to be a bit more mindful of what we're putting into our brain, because if we're not, like you said, society has gone the way of these clips that hijack our dopamine system, and we're just not going to. We're like these little hamsters on these wheels to get more dopamine hits during the day, and we're not really getting anywhere. So I think it's one of the biggest problems facing Western society today.
Yes, and maybe one day we'll figure this out as a society. There's a book called Stolen Focus, when the author makes a really good case for this. But until then, we have to take initiative. We need to be proactive, and we need to organize this for ourselves in our own lives, because the tendency is that the world is just going to get more and more distracting.
Yeah, that's I couldn't agree more, especially when artificial intelligence and quantum computing get more integrated in everyday life. I think it's a really tough battle that we're fighting. So I couldn't.
And virtual reality.
Yes, it's definitely I think the challenges for you and I raising young children today has to be higher than almost any other time in history, because life has got so good. That's why I don't know how it is in Australia, but in the US, the last decade, all these negative metrics of suicides and depressions and addictions, and they're all skyrocketing. And I think it's partly because we have the basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs. All the basic stuff is covered, but we just have, when you're on that hamster wheel, getting all those dopamine hits day in, day out, and spending hours and hours and hours in front of screens day in, day out, it kind of drives you a little bit insane. So I'm so grateful that you're out there screaming this message from the rooftop.
Yes. And as a parent, that's something that I'm aware of. The easiest thing is whenever your child is kind of antsy or, screaming or whatever, you just throw them an iPad. That's the easiest thing. And I feel that pull too, but I am aware, and I say, no, this should be the last resort. If I'm really busy and my wife is busy and no one can take care of it, then okay, you can use this for half an hour. But even then, it's like very particular apps that she could use. But this is something that I think a lot about as a dad. And, when I give her a device for her to use, I say, I'm giving it to you for you to watch this thing. But when I say that you have to give it to me, you have to give it to me. Right? That's the rule. So I'm training her that, okay, she can give it away also. She can let go of it also when it's the time. Yeah. So it's a challenge, and, but we need to be aware. It will influence a lot the way that their brains develop, and that's, for me, is very clear. Yes. So I'm super aware when I am dealing anything with the TV or devices with my kids.
I couldn't agree more. And yeah, every parent, like I used to be much more judgmental before I had kids, before I became a dad. But there's times where, we want to have a romantic dinner and the babysitter canceled, he's with us and we're going to give him a screen just so we can eat for an hour, just be with each other. But we're exactly the same. We're careful of what's on there, what they can see. And also we make him realize that this is a treat. This is not an everyday thing, everyday occurrence. And it's true. It's like for people that have never seen a kid up close with a screen, it's wild how it really is like digital cocaine for them. I mean, they are just so engrossed. It just pulls,
they hear nothing, they see nothing. Right. Right.
It really is amazing. And you think, man, this can't be good if they're getting this all the time for their poor little brains developing. So yeah, I'm so glad you said that.
Right.
Giovanni, can we talk a little bit about self-confidence? So you talked that there was a lovely quote you wrote down. You said, self-esteem and self-improvement are not given. They have to be won. And then you said self-confidence is a skill that can be learned. And I have a really good friend of mine he's so accomplished. He's good looking. He's in shape. He's a dentist. He's got everything going for him. But he's not the best communicator on dates with women. He really wants a family. And he's having real trouble on dates, finding a good connection. And he says things like, I'm just not a good dater or something. And I always tell him, I'm like, listen, you can become whoever you want. You just have to work on it. You can he's quite serious. Like, you can be a bit more silly and charming on dates and a bit more carefree. It's just a learned skill. So I'm always trying to preach that. Like, we can't if you're 5'5", you can't be 6 foot. There's certain limitations, but in terms of our personality traits, if you put the work in, you can dramatically improve in nearly anything. So I love the way you talk about that. But with people, like if you're trying to help someone become more confident, I guess, can we do I come to you and I say, Giovanni, I'm really struggling with confidence. Can you give me some kind of the summary of some things you'd recommend?
Yes. So in the book that you showed, What is Confidence, there are two types of techniques or tools. There are those things that work in the moment, and they are a little bit like the training wheels. You need that in the moment, you can use in that moment. Things like, power posing and using your voice in a particular way and keeping eye contact, and like all of these things that people who struggle with confidence, they know and they try to practice. And then there is the deeper work, the one in which you are becoming a different person. You are becoming a person who never had the self-confidence issue in the first place. You are conceiving of a different identity, a different version of yourself. And then you are learning how to embody that, to act as if that is already your truth, right? And to embody that in the way you think, the way you speak, the way you act. So that is the core framework of the book, which is applicable not only for people who want to move from self-doubt to self-confidence, but whatever is your point A and point B in your self-development journey, from anxiety to calm, from depression to joy, whatever it is, you can use this framework of changing your identity, because our identity is at the very core of everything that we do. There's that very true and very famous quote that watch your thoughts because they become your decisions become your actions become your destiny, right? But what is beneath your thoughts? What caused you to think in a certain way and not in another way? What caused you to think that you're not good at dating or that you cannot approach that type of woman? What makes you think that way? Well, that is your identity. Your identity is the set of beliefs and mindsets that you have about who you are and what is the world and how it should all life. Now, the problem is that, we are born without any identity, right? In a way, we can say it's a blank sheet of paper. That's not absolutely true, but it works for understanding this concept. But if you fast forward a few years, then we all have really strong ideas about who we are and how we navigate life. And most people will keep those ideas that were formed in childhood reactively, according to the things that were happening in their life, according to how their parents were treating them, according to the things they heard from their siblings, their teachers, etc. That forms that initial identity, and most people will live inside that box for their entire life. And if that box was that you're not good enough, and when you try something, you mess things up, well, then you're going to live for your entire life. You're going to just be coasting. You're not going to try anything difficult. You're going to have fear of failure. So the invitation of this work is that you realize that your identity, your personality is not permanent. It's not fixed. It's not the truth of you. It is your conditioning. You were conditioned to believe that you are such and such and to act in a certain way. Now, when you realize that, and, practices of meditation, journaling, self-reflection, all of that helps. When you realize that, then the question is, okay, so I don't need to be this character, right? I am not only a character in the movie, I am the screenwriter as well. So I can change my character. Who do I want to be? What qualities do I want my new self to have? And so we go through this exercise that I call creating your aspirational identity. And once that is clear for you, then from that point onward, you act with the awareness of who you want to become. And when you are in a moment where, let's say, the fear of failure arises, or anxiety arises, or self-doubt arises, you become aware like, oh, this is my old identity. This is my conditioning. And in this moment, I would choose to think with this new hat, to live life from this new point of view. And we all can do that. That's something that actors do perfectly when they're playing, but we all have the ability to do that. And every time you do that, you are taking a step towards, you are encoding that new self, and you are weakening and letting go of that old self. So in a nutshell, that is the process of, letting go of your old identity with its challenges with self-doubt, imposter syndrome, whatever it is, and embodying your new self.
I love the idea of doing little things that move you one step closer to your aspirational identity. And I think it's really cool the way you describe that. And I think I've heard that advice for people looking to get in shape. They say, don't think about it like I'm this person who's out of shape and I'm going to try and get into shape. Look at it as every day I wake up and I'm going to do the habits that a fit, healthy person does. And I will eventually become that person, but it's going to be so deeply ingrained into my habits that I'm not even before I get there, I'm going to be acting like that. That's the easiest way to get to where you want to be, is feel like you're there already. And I've given that same advice in real estate to people that don't have as much business as they want to be, but they have these really bad habits. And I've said this to so many people. I've said, think about the top agents in Chicago that you really admire. Do you think they're acting like this right now? Do you think they would say that? Do you think they'd say these little self-deprecating jokes? No, of course they wouldn't. So they hold themselves to a high standard. So if you start acting like that now, it's only a matter of time before your business will increase. So I really love that philosophy, because we have the power to decide how we're going to act and how we're going to think about ourselves.
Yes. Act as who you want to be. That is not act as who you were conditioned to be. That's what we all do. Our conditioning has a strong gravity to it. It's the lie that has been repeated 1,000 times. So it's very easy to repeat it once more. But the opportunity is that we realize and we live more creatively, not reactively. And so that is the work.
As a parent, I love the idea of, I'm never going to praise my son's accomplishments. I'm going to praise his efforts, because he can control his efforts. He might try really hard in a sporting event and still lose, but I'll be really proud of him. But if he coasts and he gets lucky and he wins, I won't be so proud of him. So I think that's such a good thing to emphasize as a parent, because you talk about how a lot of this conditioning comes from when we're young, and you just have to be so careful, because as a parent, I think your natural inclination is just to praise results as opposed to praising efforts, because we can't always control the results, but we can control the effort. And then you kind of instill that very positive mindset in your kids when they're young. Yeah,
that's a powerful lesson. I think it's from Carol Dweck in her book Mindset. And the first time that I heard it was counterintuitive, but then it made a lot of sense. And I also try to remember that and act in this way with my kids. We are giving them that first identity. It's basically us as parents that we are giving them. The way we are acting with them or toward them, the things we're saying, that is going to be like 90% responsible for their identity. And if we are aware of this when we are saying things, when we're interacting with them, then we can be more conscious and we can be more wise. We can be wiser about what we do and what we say. And that's not always going to be possible. It also requires some self-control. It also requires that we do, work to change ourselves, because a lot of our own things are passing without us knowing, unconsciously. Yes. But if we know that, I'm creating her identity, right? So what type of identity do I want to give my daughter? What type of starting point in life do I want to give her? So, for example, sometimes she starts doing something and she says, I can't. And I said, never say you can't until you have tried 10 times. And of course, she doesn't get it, but it's getting there somewhere. And one day that's going to be helpful for her. So these are the type of things that I think about when I'm educating my children.
Yeah, well, when I think back to, it's very easy for our generation to look back and look at all the mistakes that our parents made. But I think it was just a different time a generation ago. People are a lot more this wisdom about things like be careful what you tell your kids when they're young, because it's going to imprint certain things that they're going to have to live with. People weren't talking about that 30 years ago. So I don't blame my parents for anything. And I'm very grateful, actually, that I feel like my dad gave me a growth mindset without really explicitly saying it, just in the way he kind of used to talk about things. If you put the work in, you'll get better. And I think I'm so glad that I discovered martial arts at a young age, because I think I was a very unnaturally talented, especially athletically, kid. But I saw immediately that if I put a bit of work in, I can get better at something tangibly. And then once you have that proof and evidence of one thing, you'll have that for anything. If it's something physical, you can also learn how to be more charming, or how to be wiser, or how to, there's so many things you can learn when you have that mindset that if I put the work in, I can improve in that aspect.
Yes, when you realize that everything is a skill, that even confidence is a skill, and discipline is a skill, and kindness and charm, and all of these things are skills. Yes. Then it's like, not do I have it or don't I have it? Like, do I want to develop it? Am I willing to put in the work? And then you can have it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you're right. Kindness is a skill. I think I'm a lot more compassionate now than I was 5 years ago. And it's been a conscious effort to try and be more compassionate.
Yes. Yes.
Giovanni, how did you discover martial arts?
Well, as a teenager, and 12, 14 years old, I was repeatedly bullied at school. And then I asked my dad to put me into martial arts. And I did 2 years of karate first, then I moved to Kung Fu. And when I started doing martial arts, no one bullied me anymore. No one knew that something about me changed. Something about my body language, about how I was carrying myself. In a way, like I was being beaten up in martial arts class twice a week by people who are much more skilled than the bullies. So I was not worried anymore. So that's how I got into it. And then, the specific styles of martial arts that I got, especially Kung Fu, has a deep philosophy and history and ethics and all of this behind it. So that married well with my interest in philosophy and personal growth since that age.
I'm so glad. So I remember when I got into martial arts as a teenager, and then I did some kickboxing competitions, and I got kind of beat up a bit. And I remember my dad was kind of confused, and he said, Lawrence, if you never did any type of training, and you got beaten up a couple of times in life, that would be a lot better than getting beaten up all the time in training and then competing, and win or lose, you're kind of you're getting a bit beat up. And I don't think I had the words to explain it at the time, but what you said is exactly the reason you do it. It's about the way you carry yourself, and it's about the confidence that it gives you in life. And I think, I'm 45 now, and I started the same age as you. I started a week before my 13th birthday. And I think, looking back at my life, if there's one key thing that's responsible for the most of the positive things in my life, it's the wisdom and lessons and confidence that came from martial arts, 3+ decades. And so, but it's the reason that I got into it, I used to watch the 1980s movies with these larger than life characters like Jean-Claude Van Damme, and I was like, I want to be like that. If you want to do, the philosophy is, if you want to be a force of good, you still have to be powerful and strong. Otherwise, you can't, be a force against evil and protect people. But I didn't even realize all the other benefits that I get from it. I thought I'd just get in shape and learn a skill that might benefit me. And it's just, I think that's I don't know too many other things that I can recommend for young kids that have as much payoff and benefits as martial arts.
Absolutely. I remember once in my Kung Fu class when I was learning a particular form with 2 broadswords. And there was a movement that my teacher showed me where you are repeatedly rolling on the ground with 2 broadswords kind of going all like this. And it's supposed to be training for a war scene in the past where you're surrounded by people and you're kind of cutting their legs while they're trying to attack you on the floor. So something crazy like that. And but he showed me that 3 times. And in Chinese martial arts, they say, like, we show you 3 times. If you don't get it by the 3rd time, you're not ready. That's like the traditional way. But so he showed me 3 times, and then he went out for lunch, and I was alone in the academy. And I couldn't get it. Like, how can I do this as I'm rolling, like, and without hurting myself? And I felt like I just can't. But he said, like, just keep on doing it, it will come. And then after a few repetitions, it came like, oh, so that's how we do it. And that experience, just speaking to what you mentioned now, that experience encoded in me this sense like, oh, next time in any area of my life that I think I can't do something, if I just continue paying attention, like with really wanting to do it right, something will happen, it will come. I'll be able to do it eventually. And so that's just one example of how our journey in martial arts, or also in any other art form that has depth to it, can build ourselves, our personality.
Yes, I love that. I remember one time I was having dinner with a couple, and my friend asked my wife and I, he said, if there's one character trait that you could really, have strong in your son, what would it be? If you could have any character trait, what would you choose? And I said strength. And at the same time, my wife said compassion. And I thought, God, that's so beautiful. We're a good couple. We complement each other, And I think about that a lot with my son is I don't want to make him a miniature version of me, because I want him to find his own path and his own passions. But at the same time, I also want to give him the gift that martial arts gave me. So it's a very tough balance because we decide as parents, what sports do you get yourself in? What sports do you expose your kids to? Like we have to make, exactly. And we have to make the choice. And there's so many different options. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but I know coming from England, there was very few choices. There was rugby, there was soccer, there was tennis, there was a couple of sports. In America, there's so many different sports available. So you do, as a parent, you do have to kind of pick and choose a few and, see what your kids are, what they're drawn to, what interests them, what inspires them. So I think about that a lot. I think I don't want to make him a carbon copy of me, because I think that's selfish as a parent. But at the same time, I do have a bit more wisdom to know certain things will give him a lot of lessons later on in life. So I think a lot about that.
Yes. Yeah, well, I've put my when she was 3-year-old, she started taekwondo classes. That's what they amazing. Have for kids, taekwondo classes. Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. And she likes it, but I can see that she likes more the dance classes. So probably she will continue more with that.
Yeah. I gotta say, there's when I started jiu-jitsu in Chicago, there would in a typical class, there might be one female student. There was one that would come and go, and then should quit, and then another one come. It was very, very rare. And now in jiu-jitsu, at least, there's a real explosion of females that are competing and training, and they're so dedicated. And it's really, really, there's nothing more powerful than Giovanni. Than I remember one student, she's got to be 105 pounds. And she was going against a guy who was kind of being rough and probably outweighed her by 60 pounds. And I look across, and she's put him to sleep with a triangle choke. He's unconscious on the mat. And that's a beautiful thing to see. A woman with very petite, but with a lot of power. And so I think it's so empowering to women to have that confidence. But at the same time, like you said, if they're much more interested in something else, you also don't want to stop them doing that other thing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Very cool.
You said you quoted one of my favorite quotes from Muhammad Ali. You said, "The man who has no imagination has no wings." And I think that's so important, is to when you're trying to figure out your aspirational self, is to have imagination. Because if you're in a dead end place in life, a lot of the time, I just had this realization that one of the best things that happened to me today was one of the worst things that happened to me 10 years ago. I kind of felt like I went through an early midlife crisis with a lot of bad things happening at the same time. And at the time, I was so miserable that now it forced me to grow and change as a person, that now 10 years later, I'm so happy it happened. But it's such a weird way to look at it. But it's also, I think it's very inspiring, because when people are kind of at rock bottom and they're in a terrible place, you can kind of remind them that, hey, listen, I know this seems terrible now, but this could be something you're very grateful for in the years to come. But can you talk a little bit about letting your imagination soar? Because I think that's so important. Before we do anything, we have to imagine a better time. And I know that's one of the hallmarks of depression, is depressed people, that they can't imagine a better time. Even maybe intellectually, they can think, well, it's not going to be like this forever, but their imagination can't go to a better place. And that's why people can spiral down and into suicide and all these tragic events, because they can't imagine a better time. So I just love that idea of the power of imagination.
Yes. In my coaching, when we're going through a specific behavior pattern that is not helpful for a person, and they know that they want to change, they need to change, but they don't know how, I ask them, can you imagine a different way of being? And sometimes they say no. And that's a deeper problem, because if you can't imagine it, you can't become it. If you don't have a blueprint in your mind of what the solution might be, even in bold contours of that blueprint, but something in your mind that the solution might be like this, then you are bound by your current reality. So imagination is our ability to, in a way, free ourselves from the limitations of how things are now, the limitations of the status quo, and to allow ourselves to reinvent a solution to a problem, to reinvent a situation in our life, to reinvent who we are. And then the more we think about it, the more that new image becomes clear in our awareness, then we can start operating from it, and we can start making that a reality. And it's a process. It's a process, but every product around you right now and around me and the things that we're using first existed in someone's imagination. And it didn't exist in reality before it existed in their imagination. So imagination is perhaps one of the key things that separate us from animals. It gives us the ability to think about the future, to think of solutions to problems, and a version of our life that we'll be more excited about.
Yes, you just reminded me of that Albert Einstein quote when he said imagination is more important than knowledge. And it's so true. We have to let our imagination soar. And I'd imagine, going back to what you said earlier about the dopamine detox, that's when you're going to let your imagination soar. It's just when you let yourself get bored and you let yourself have space and time to really think about, what do I want, and where couldn't my trajectory go? And that's why I give you so much credit, because like you said, to your wife, you said, let's give Brazil a go. And if it doesn't work, we'll go somewhere else. Well, it's not easy to pick up and move from Brazil to Australia, but you did it. And I think that takes a lot of courage, and it takes imagination too.
Yes. And so imagination is something that I encourage people to explore. Okay, you are just imagining this. Like, we have this attitude towards imagination that it's almost like it's just fantasy and delirium and all of that. But no, imagination is the beginning of, it can be the beginning of something new. It can be the beginning of change. So, all the exercises that athletes do for visualization, they are imagining, they're using the imagination that, you are there and you are performing better than you have ever performed. And you are so tuned in, and you are, jumping higher or running faster, whatever. That's happening in your imagination. But we know that if we believe that imagination, if we believe it into reality, that actually changes the way you operate.
And you had a lovely study you cited where it was something like people that did deliberate practice improved 24%, and people that only imagined getting better got 23% better, or whatever. It was almost identical. And that just shows the power of the mind. And I love being reminded about that. Back when I was competing in martial arts, I felt like, looking back now, one of my biggest problems is I worked so much on the physical, and I didn't work enough with my mindset and just imagining greatness. I just worked really hard. I was a real disciplined worker, but my mind definitely didn't go anywhere close to my full potential. So I'm so glad you emphasized that, because it's so important.
Yes.
You also talked about spending 10 years living with a narcissist. I'd love you to talk a little bit about that, Giovanni. Sorry if it brings back painful memories, but the reason is I've recently had two good friends of mine. One was married and one was engaged, and both the relationships ended. And they're friends of mine, but they're also friends with each other. And they were talking about how both of the ex-partners were really, really narcissistic. And I think you talk about having had that experience, you can now spot narcissism from a mile away. And that's so important, because looking at my two friends that were in these bad relationships, a narcissist will make you feel like you're the guilty party when you're actually the victim. And I think that's so I'd love to just talk a little bit about, pick your brains about how people can spot narcissism and why, I think you should run from the hills if you're around a narcissist.
Yes, it's something that we are becoming more aware of. Like, nowadays, there's so many books and videos about narcissism. In the past, we weren't aware of as a society much. And then it's just like, oh, that person has a difficult personality. He's a difficult person, or she's a difficult person. And that doesn't give us enough clarity, enough nuance to really appreciate what the problem is. In my case, it took me years, decades, to realize that I grew up with a narcissistic mother. And then when I realized what narcissism is, then it all fit. Like, oh, that's exactly the behavior. And I could see with more clarity than I had ever seen. Because my attitude growing up was like, okay, that's the way she behaves. That's who she is. I'm not going to let that affect me. I'm going to be in my own world. And I became really good at that. I became really good at detaching, really good at being unaffected. I almost became a monk, and monks, they are Olympic athletes at being unaffected by everything. So, but then when I realized, that this is a mental health thing, or a personality disorder, however you want to call it. Narcissists, it's all about them. They don't really care about you. If it seems that they do, it's in the surface. It's because you're useful for them. And if you challenge their views, their personality, their ways of being in any way, it's a no-go. It's inflexible. There's no way that they can be wrong. There's this little joke that I read a few years ago, and it describes narcissism perfectly, which is you are sharing something that person did that really hurt you or upset you. And their answer is like, it didn't happen. If it did, it wasn't like that. If it was like that, you are exaggerating. And if not, it's never them. There's always something else, the problem. Yeah, I haven't been thinking about narcissism now for several years, for a long time, since I have written the first manuscript of the book. But in the chapter 17 that you have read in the book, like I go into really a lot of detail of what are the mental and emotional games that they play and how they keep us hooked. Right. So I think it's really important. The more true you are to yourself, and the more you have the courage to be yourself and to speak out and to say no when necessary, the more you have like a shield against narcissists. Narcissists will not be interested in you because they can't do their thing with you.
Yeah. They can't penetrate your shield. You're such a self-reflective, thoughtful person. What is something, so I know since you were 14, you've been really working on yourself and trying to, you've had a constant journey of self-improvement. What's something that maybe you've been struggling with recently? Because I always find it so interesting with people that are so, intuitive and they're so aware of probably their strengths and their weaknesses. But, after all these years, is there some things that you're struggling with right now still today?
I think an idea that I have revisited or being reintroduced to a few years ago, the idea that every virtue casts a shadow. So after you do some work in personal development and you transform yourself to a certain degree, your challenges are not going to come from your shortcomings. Those are somewhat under control. Your challenges will come actually from your virtues, from your strengths. Because if you overuse a certain strength, you fall into its shadow side. So for example, perseverance is a strength. But if you default to persevering always and no matter what, that's what you do, that's great in maybe 70% of the cases, but in several cases, it's not the right answer to the challenge. The right answer to the challenge might be, you know what? I now realize that this was the wrong choice. This is not for me. I'm going to let it go. But if you're just persevering, then, you have become a victim of your own virtues. And coming back to the idea of how to relate with narcissists, the problem is narcissists surround themselves with people who have what I call the virtues of goodness. They are people who kindness, consideration, patience, tolerance, they have all those virtues, but they don't know that each virtue has its shadow, and they're often falling to the shadow side of that virtue. So whatever the other person does, you let go, you tolerate, you forgive, and you don't realize that that is being a limitation, and that's not the right way of dealing with that situation. So for me, realizing this not only intellectually, but in my own life, what does it mean? Like the qualities that I have naturally or that I have developed through effort, what are the shadow sides of those qualities that I might be falling into? And I was falling into many of them. So for me, this was an aha moment. And then I started questioning myself, like sometimes when I face a challenge, what is something that Giovanni would not do facing this challenge? Let's go do that. Because then I'm training myself to think outside the box.
I love that. What you said is so funny. So I had this conversation with my wife recently where we were talking about people we know who are just quite difficult, and they're romantic partner would always seem to be so kind and sweet and caring. And I said, well, of course they have to put up with that. So that's kind of what you said about narcissists surround themselves with very open, kind, forgiving, nice people, because they have to, because another narcissist will tell them to go, go play in traffic. I don't want to be around you. So the more difficult people, they have to be around people that are very, very easy and forgiving and tolerant. So that's true. And I love the idea of the shadow side. So when you were talking, it just reminded me of that phenomenon we see so much in real successful business people, entrepreneurs. They can be so successful in building billion-dollar companies, but their romantic lives are a complete mess. And historic example was Napoleon. Napoleon was taken over pretty much all of Western Europe, but he was getting run around by Josephine, who was just treating him like terribly, and he would just run around after her like a little puppy dog. And it's because if you're a real winner in life, you don't know when you're fundamentally, I think, very uncompatible and you're in a bad relationship. So you'll keep trying to work on it. And maybe I can work harder and fix it. Whereas the hardest thing to do for a winner in life is to say, this is the wrong battle I'm fighting. This is a losing battle. I'm going to accept the loss on this one and just kind of pull away. I've noticed that a lot in either personal friends that I know that are incredibly successful in business, but they're terrible in romantic partners, or historical examples, or people like Elon Musk, where he's the most successful entrepreneur of this generation, but he's had a bunch of divorces and toxic relationships and things like that. So I think that's that idea of the shadow side is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And then the answer to this is that we need to seek a more holistic development, right? People who are very analytical, they tend to not be very creative. If you're very much in your mind, you tend not to be in your body, and vice versa. So that's all tendencies, right? If you're very energized, if you're a very energetic person, you tend to not be patient. If you're very patient, you tend to not be very ambitious or energetic. It comes like this. So whatever virtue or qualities each of the listeners now has, you can think like, what are the that may be coming with this quality and I was unaware of? And when you become aware of that, then the path is, let me go and develop the opposite also. So I can be energetic and patient, so that I can be a warrior, a scholar, and an artist, so that I can have holistic development. That for me is the ideal.
I love that. One thing, my wife's a therapist, and she's helped me she's very gentle and subtle, because she knows that if she tried to give me advice earlier on in the relationship, I'm a fighter, I'm going to fight her on it. So just slowly over the years, I've noticed that I've become so much better at being patient and being compromising and things like that. And that's exactly the shadow side of when I was young. I was all about perseverance and discipline and winning in whatever I'm trying to do in life. And so the shadow side is I'm inflexible, I'm maybe not so patient, I maybe have a temper. So that's so interesting. And one of the biggest compliments I got from a good friend, he said to me, I think you're much more patient and you're less volatile than you used to be. Because I always thought almost like it was a good thing, because I'm like, yeah, I'm volatile because I'm passionate and I want to go through life being passionate. But it's not always good to be passionate. You've got to be able to, especially in the business world, you've got to be able to keep your cool, right? You can't be flying off the handle and things like that. So that idea of the shadow side if there's one thing I've got out of this, Giovanni, that's really, really good advice. And I love what you said about figuring out what your strengths are and then working on the shadow side of it. Because like you said, every strength someone has, they have a opposing weakness.
Yes.
Giovanni, I'd love to ask you, so you said for a long time you were thinking about, you wanted to be a kind of a Buddhist monk. And when I was in Thailand doing some training when I was in my early 20s, and for whatever reason, I ended up at this Thai person's funeral. And one of the women there took a real liking to me, and she gave me this beautiful book on Buddhism in English. And she kind of almost convinced me. I wasn't really, really religious or anything at the time. So it wasn't like, I almost was looking for a philosophy to live life. And so she gave me this book, and we talked about a beautiful conversation about Buddhism. And I really spent the next few weeks reading it. And I was so convinced that Buddhism is just a great way to live life. And then more recently, or a few years later, I should say, I heard a Western philosopher, talking about how trying to be a Buddhist is the idea of non-attachment is so silly to anyone that has a family. Look at us, like our wives and kids are the most important thing in our life. So I'd love just to think a little bit about how you think about it now, because I still think there's so much wisdom in Buddhism. The idea of life is constant suffering. We always want things. So if you can have the idea of almost the cessation of want, we are going to be happier. But I do also agree with this philosopher, I wish I could remember who it was, that it's not, if you're trying to raise a family, it's the opposite of, you have all these attachments and life is going to be pain. When our kids hurt themselves, it's painful as a parent. If anything happens to our kids down the road, it's going to be the most painful thing to us. So the only way to, I don't want to live a life where I don't have any attachments, because I want a full, rich life. And with that is going to come pain and is going to come suffering. So I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about how your views of Buddhism are and how they've evolved.
Yeah. Now, this is a really good question. And it's the type of thing that I've been thinking about for many years. I didn't expect in this conversation, but I'm glad it came. If you are completely detached as a father, you're not going to be a good father.
Yes.
If you're completely detached as a husband, you're not going to be a good husband. Yeah. We're not going to give the emotional warmth and connection that is the essence of these roles in life, right? So what's important for us to understand is, I've spent many years studying the different spiritual traditions, and not only their modern expressions, but the history, like where does it come from? What's the original intention and all of this? And a lot of what we read in Buddhism, maybe 95%, is the teachings of the Buddha for the monks, is the teachings of a monk for monks. And so I'm not saying that there's obviously a lot of universal truth in that, but the underlying advice about how to be and how to live life is suited perfectly for monks, and not suited perfectly for non-monks, for people who live in the world, who have a family, a job, and other aspirations that they wish to pursue. So once you understand that, then you can read those teachings through these lenses and see what applies and what doesn't apply. There are many spiritual traditions that they are traditions of renunciance. They are, created by monks and for monks. And in those traditions, when they were going to teach people who live in the world, the teachings were a bit different. The emphasis was different. The Buddha was not going to say to a normal householder to be completely detached from your family. And no, he's going to say, this is what you can think about. This is the type of practices you can do. These are the rules for a good life, etc. And there are other spiritual traditions who developed more within a family and a society type of setting. And then they are different. They do not emphasize detachment in this manner. And what I have come to realize in my own journey, I have changed philosophies or spiritual traditions several times, and I still get many lessons from all the ones that I've studied. But at the end of the day, you have to find the one that really speaks to you.
I couldn't agree more on the different journeys. So I was raised in a kind of a weird household. So my mom was kind of a lingering Catholic from France, but she wasn't particularly, devout practicing. And my dad was raised in a really crazy childhood as an atheist. So he was completely had no ties to any religion. So when I was young, Buddhism really appealed to me. And then as I got older, I love, especially when you're going through tough times, and just the Stoic philosophy, I think, is such a beautiful way to live life. And now the Taoist philosophy of they said there's a lovely book called the Tao of Winnie the Pooh, and he's saying he's the ultimate Taoist because he just accepts what life is. And I think I'm trying to be a bit more like that now, where of course I want to try to get the best of whatever aspect of my life I'm trying to focus on, but at the same time I want to be much more open to just riding the waves of life as opposed to trying to fight every wave. I don't think that's a very good way to go through life. So I love that idea of trying to just, let your things, let your feelings and the things that inspire you evolve as you live life. Because too many people, they get fixed to a certain mindset and they'll just never change it. And I think that's one of the problems with today is, if you're a Republican in America, you're tied to Republican values and you won't even think about if they're right or wrong, because that's your identity. And I think we should be much more open to ideas. So I'd love to hear what other kind of philosophies and religions you've thought about over the journey.
Yeah. So, So I stayed within the Buddhist framework for maybe 3 or 4 years. And then after that, I went into a philosophy of non-duality called Advaita. And I stayed there for like 9 years. And both of these, they were very, let's say, life denying. They were kind of more all about detachment. And, growing up with a narcissistic mother, I was really good at that skill. So, I felt like, wow, it's like I seem to be pretty advanced in this path. Like I can do what they're telling me to do. It's to some extent. But then one time it came a point where I realized, like, no, that's not what I want. And it's not that I'm saying that these things are wrong or that there's something superior to these things. I'm just saying that they're not for me. And there are other paths who are also incredibly deep and true that speak more to me. Right. So, for example, I'm gonna share one teaching that I've read that may sound absurd, but the Buddha once said that if a thief comes to your house and he ties you up and he cuts out every part of your body, if that person has a thought of anger towards that thief, that person is not my disciple. So that what the Buddha said that, and I read that and I felt like, at that point in my practice, I felt like I can go to a place internally where I am like that, where the Buddha can say, like, okay, he's my disciple, like completely. But I don't want this. That's not what I want. And there are other approaches to spirituality that another master that I've been with, like a yogi. So for the Hindu yoga tradition, he said, if someone attacks you, it's your duty to defend yourself. So I feel like, oh, that matches my way of thinking much more as a martial artist and other aspects. So I guess that this is opening a bigger conversation for people who are interested in spirituality and philosophies, to understand that there are many different paths, there are many different approaches, and they're all very unique. And in some really important points, they deeply disagree with each other. And you need to spend the time exploring, seeing what works for you, and then you select and stay with it.
And I will say this, Giovanni, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in America, especially coming here as a young man from Europe, the focus on prestige and status through wealth is definitely overemphasized in the US. So I think having a bit more of a Buddhist mindset, if you're in that world, I'm in the entrepreneurial world and I have been since I was 24, so over 20 years. I think just having a bit of a Buddhist philosophy is very healthy. That because I'm in that world, it kind of counterbalances some of those things where if you got money, it's everything and nothing else matters. And I think actually the reverse is true. I think money's important. You need to learn how to manage money and pay your bills. And in the US, we have inflation and things are getting more expensive. So if you don't have money, it's going to be tough to raise a family without being stressed. But at the same time, getting money is only going to solve your monetary problems. And there's so many other things that I prize so much more than that. Things like health and time and love and freedom. So yeah, I really love what you said. Giovanni, I don't want to take up all your time. I do want to ask you one more question though. As a parent with two young kids, what is something that you've changed since becoming a parent? Like a kind of a mindset or a view or a philosophy that you've really changed since you became a dad?
That's a tough one. I think, for me, it has become clearer the idea of different stages of development. That with a child, when she is 2 years old, if you're trying to set limits and saying like, no, this is not okay, and you yell or you do whatever, the brain is not developed enough for that to register as kind of a rule of behavior for them. They're just not at that stage. All they're going to remember is the emotional distaste of that experience will be kind of encoded in them, and that's what. But wait one more year, and then you're able to they're able to understand some of that. And so for me, this concept of this doesn't work now, but if you wait a little bit, it's going to work. It's just not the right time. This concept of things having the right time for it, and the same thing that before was not valid now is valid, that became more clear raising a kid.
That's actually great philosophy for life. I don't know if you're familiar with the British author Charles Dickens, but he wrote about the 7 stages of man. And when we're in different stages, you have different priorities. And I think that's such a useful lesson for life. I remember seeing this little clip that my wife sent me, and it was saying, we've all been there with young kids when they're throwing tantrums and you're tired and you're frustrated and you get angry. And it said, just when your kid is driving you nuts, just look at their little hands and feet and just remember how small they are. And we're expecting them to have responses like you or I would have as adults, and they're just these little tiny things. So I feel like that's been such a good reminder. But for me, I think the biggest change, Giovanni, has been I didn't appreciate the passage of time very much. So when I was 36 and I was 37, I was 38, a couple of years would go by and it would mean nothing to me. I'm fundamentally pretty similar still. I've got a bit more gray and I've got a little bit less energy, but I'm very, very similar. Whereas when you see a kid and how much they change in week to week, you just appreciate that, man, we don't get a second go at this. Time is so important. It's the ultimate resource and it's running out and it seems to go quicker. And it just made me so much more appreciative of every day. And I think that's something that I wish I'm in my mid 40s. I wish I'd had that appreciation for life and time when I was a bit younger. But I guess it's better to have it now than wait till I'm 70. So just that the passage of time when you see them developing so quickly, it's wild.
Yeah, very nice. Well said.
Well, Giovanni, listen, I'll give you the last word. I'll put a link to your website. I definitely recommend people check out your work. You're one of those people, honestly, that it makes me so grateful as a podcast host to connect with people like you. And I'm really thankful for Sue for introducing us. But just, you've given me so much wisdom today, and you've really given me an appreciation, and not just to think about my shadow side, which I think is a really cool thing that I haven't really thought about before, but also just to spend more time detached away from that dopamine treadmill, because I think that's one of the biggest things that I need to work on myself, is because I use my job as an excuse that I have to be connected all the time. But I'm just like everyone else, where I can waste 30 minutes on Instagram and things like that, where I know it doesn't impact my happiness and it's not taking me where I want to go. So I feel like I've got so much from this conversation, and you're such a kindred spirit, but I look up to you a lot because I think you're a little bit further along in the self-development than I am. So thank you so much for sharing your time, and I'll give you the last word.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation. I go into many podcasts and not always I get original, interesting questions. So I really enjoyed spending time with you today. I guess my final word would be an invitation for people to discover what they want in their life. What is your aspiration? What will really make a difference 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Who do you want to be? And know that there is a path for you to get there, that you don't need to be living inside the same box. You can be a different person, you can be living a different life, but you need to find out what that is for you, that blueprint, that desire, and then be willing to put in the effort and to make the sacrifices, and you will get there.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's so well said, Giovanni. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.